I had governed Stonewarden for 12 years, without once descending into the lower vaults. That is the truth I have to live with now, not that I was cruel, not that I failed in battle or starved my people or burned the wrong village. I governed well by every measure the Highland councils kept. I kept the passes open in winter, mediated the border disputes along the Graymere, held the wolf packs fed and housed and proud. I was a careful king, a thorough one. The kind who reads every charter placed before him, who remembers every face at a petition table, who does not let a grievance fester into a wound. And yet I let the lower vaults alone for 12 years, because Dorath told me there was nothing there worth my attention, and I believed him. That is the thing about a man who governs carefully. He learns to delegate. He learns which of his first elders can be trusted with the daily weight of record-keeping, the cataloging of old seals and dry contracts, the endless papering over of the Citadel's history. I trusted Dorath with the vaults because he had served my father before me, and my father had trusted him, and the man had the particular gift of making important things seem tedious. You do not question a man who makes tedium his armor. You let him keep his corner of the world, and you return to the work that matters. I returned to the work that matters. Merrin arrived in Stonewarden on the 31st morning of late autumn, in a cart with 3 other archivists and a box of cataloging tools, sent up from the lower academies to help with the overdue inventory of the Citadel's secondary holdings. I did not see her arrive. I learned of her arrival the way I learned of most things that happened below the Great Hall, through the weekly steward's report, a line that said a 4-person archiving team had been installed in the East Annex and would begin work on the Vault of Seals within the fortnight. I initialed the report. I moved on. The first time I became aware of Merrin as a person rather than a line in a steward's report was 3 weeks later, when Oswin came back from the vaults with ink on his collar and a question I did not know how to answer. Oswin was 8 years old. He was my ward, the son of a border captain who had died in the Graymere dispute 2 years prior, left in my care by a last wish I had not refused. He was a careful boy, quiet in the way that comes not from shyness but from observation, the kind of child who watches a room before entering it, who notices which candle has been moved since yesterday, who saves his questions for when he is certain you will hear them. He did not ask many questions. When he did, they tended to matter. He came to my study doorway after supper, collar inked, and stood there until I looked up. "The archivist in the lower vault," he said. "The one with the gray robe and the brown hair. She does not know who she is." I set down the charter I was reading. "What do you mean?" He considered the question with the gravity he gave everything. "She touched the big seal today, the round one that has not worked in a long time. It lit up. She pulled her hand back and looked at it like she did not know it was her hand, like she had not done it." He paused. I asked her why her hand was glowing. She said she did not know. I was silent for a moment. "How long have you been going to the vaults?" I asked. "Since the 2nd week," he said. "She is good at explaining things. She showed me how the old catalog system works with the colored threads. She is very patient." I should have gone down that night. Looking back, I understand that the child had handed me the thread that would unravel everything, and the only reason I did not pull it immediately was that 12 years of careful governance had taught me not to act on a child's anecdote before sleeping on it. I noted it. I told Oswin to go to bed. I sat with the charter a while longer, but I did not read it. What I did instead was think about the stonemark seal. Every alpha king of Stonewarden knows the stonemark from the histories. It is the oldest object in the citadel, older than the building that houses it, a disk of veined gray stone, 2 feet across, set into a pedestal in the deepest chamber of the lower vaults. The histories say it was carved by the Warden Queens, the bloodline of women who held the Highland passes before the wolf packs came to them, who negotiated the original treaties and embedded those treaties in stone so they could not be unmade by a single king's ambition. The seal was the authentication of those treaties, a document that could only be opened, only read, only witnessed by the living blood of the Warden Queen line. 400 years ago, the last acknowledged Warden Queen had died without a named heir. The seal had gone dark the night she died, according to the histories, and had not lit since. Doreth had told me this was because the bloodline was gone, extinct, that the seal was a historical artifact, nothing more, and that its chamber was kept locked not out of any mystical necessity, but simply to prevent the curious from damaging an ancient object. I had believed him. I thought about Marin's hand glowing, according to an 8-year-old boy, and I thought about what that would mean if the boy was right. And then I thought about why Doreth would have told me the bloodline was extinct. I did not sleep well. In the morning, I went to the vaults. I did not announce myself. I did not send word ahead, did not take the ceremonial route through the Great Hall's lower passage, did not bring guards. I went the way I had gone as a child, through the service corridor that runs behind the east kitchens, down the back stair, through the narrow stone hall that smells of old paper and cold air. My father had shown me that route when I was 7. I had not used it since, but the stone remembers and my feet did. The Vault of Seals occupies the lowest level of the East Annex, a long room with a barrel-vaulted ceiling and a floor of fitted gray slate, lit by iron lanterns hung at intervals along the walls. The seals themselves are displayed on open shelving along the east wall, wax documents, impressed silver discs, folded lead plates, cloth-backed stamps, catalogued by era, running from the Citadel's founding to the present century. At the far end of the room, behind a locked iron door that stands open, is the inner chamber, the Stonemark's chamber. I heard the scratch of a pen before I reached the door. I stopped in the corridor and looked through. She was seated at the cataloging table in the outer vault, her back to the corridor, working through a stack of wax seal impressions with the focused stillness of someone who is very good at not wasting motion. The gray archivist's robe, the brown hair gathered back in a practical knot, a pen in her right hand, a small classification book open on her left, colored thread markers laid in a row. The lantern light put a warm edge along her shoulder and caught the ink on her fingers. Ordinary, that was the word I reached for. She looked entirely ordinary. I had governed 12 years of petitions, and I had met women of every kind, warriors and merchants and healers and scholars and noble daughters brought by their families to the throne room with poorly concealed matrimonial intent. I knew how to read a room. I knew how to look at a person and find the thing they were most carefully hiding. It was the skill I was proudest of. And Marin looked like she was hiding nothing, which is the one thing I did not know how to account for. My wolf had been quiet since I came downstairs, not the silence of disinterest, the silence of attention. The difference is a thing I cannot fully explain to someone who has never carried a wolf. Disinterest is an absence, a flatness, the way a great empty hall sounds. Attention is a held breath. My wolf was holding its breath. I stepped through the doorway. She heard me and looked up. For a moment her expression cycled through the natural sequence, startlement, recognition of rank from the look of me, a composed settling into professional calm, and she stood and offered the appropriate small bow. "My Lord King, I apologize I did not hear you announced." "I was not announced," I said. "Carry on." "I only wanted to see the vault." She looked at me for a half-second longer than the situation required, the way someone does when they are trying to understand what is actually being asked of them, and are honest enough not to pretend they already know. Then she sat back down and turned to her work. I moved through the outer vault slowly, reading the shelves. This part was true. I had never come to audit the collection myself, and it was detailed, far more detailed than the steward's reports had suggested. The colored thread system was elegant. I could follow the chronology just from the markers without reading a word. She had a good mind for order. I reached the door of the inner chamber and looked in. The stone mark sat on its pedestal at the chamber's center, the same gray disk I had seen once briefly as a boy when my father brought me down and told me the history. It looked the same as I remembered. Veined stone, entirely still, no light, no warmth. A dead thing. "May I ask," I said, without looking away from the seal, "how long you have been cataloging the inner chamber's holdings?" "8 days, my lord." Her voice from the outer vault, steady and clear. The inner chamber's inventory had not been updated since the previous archivist's tenure. The record gaps are considerable. Dorath would have overseen the previous inventory. "A beat, so the records indicate, my lord." I turned around. "When you work in the inner chamber, do you touch the seal?" She set her pen down. When she met my eyes this time, there was something different in her expression. Not alarm, not guilt. Something closer to the look of someone who has been carrying a question they did not think they were allowed to ask, and has just realized someone else is asking it too. "I did," she said. "Once. I should not have. It is not part of the cataloging scope, I know that. I was calibrating the measurement reference for the table entries, and I reached across the pedestal and my hand." She stopped. Then, quietly, "It lit." "Show me," I said. She came into the inner chamber with the careful composure of a woman who was thoroughly uncertain about what was happening, but was too professional to let it become visible. I had governed 12 years of petitions. I recognized the composure. I also recognized that underneath it she was frightened, not of me precisely, but of what her own hand had done. There is a particular kind of fear that belongs to discovering you are not what you thought you were. I had seen it in soldiers who turned out to be commanders, in servants who turned out to be heirs. It has a quality of dislocation, as though the world has shifted slightly to one side and your feet have not moved to follow. She stood before the pedestal. The stone mark sat between us, gray and still. "Put your hand on it," I said. She looked at me. "My lord." "I am not asking as a test," I said. "I am asking because I need to see what Oswin described, and I need to see it before I go back upstairs and make decisions that cannot be unmade." I kept my voice even. "I will not hold you responsible for what the stone does. Whatever it does is its own doing." She considered that. Then she reached out and laid her palm flat against the seal's surface. The light was not the pale ghost pulse I had half convinced myself Oswin might have imagined. It was strong and cold and silver, the way the moon is silver on new snow, not warm, not amber, not the color of the lanterns or of fire, but its own light, the kind that does not borrow from anything. It came up through the veins of the stone and filled the disk from edge to center, and the temperature in the chamber dropped by several degrees, and on the stone shelf above the pedestal, where an ancient lead plate document sat behind a catalog tag that said Warden Queen Compact. Inactive, the lead plates shivered and shifted apart, as though a lock had been turned. Marin took her hand back. The light faded but did not fully disappear. A faint silver pulse remained in the deepest veins of the stone, slow and steady as breathing. She and I looked at each other across the seal. "I do not know why it does that," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "I know why," I said. And that was the moment I understood how many years I had been lied to. "I need to tell you something about Dorath, so you understand what I was working against when I went back upstairs." He had been First Elder for 30 years. He had served my father for 18 of those years and me for 12. He was the sort of man who fills a room not through force or volume but through accumulated presence. He had been in the room so long that the room had rearranged itself around him, and no one quite remembered how it had been arranged before. He knew every charter, every treaty, every elder on the council, every debt and favor and grievance that ran through the Citadel's politics. He was methodical, precise, and exceptionally good at making things disappear into administrative complexity. He was also, I was now almost certain, the reason the last Warden Queen line had been declared extinct. I did not go to him directly. I am a careful king. I went first to the secondary record archive in the Upper East Wing, the one Doreth did not oversee, which held duplicates of the most ancient charters, and I spent 3 hours reading. What I found was this. 80 years before my reign, the acknowledged last Warden Queen had died, as the histories recorded, without a named heir. What the histories did not record, what Doreth's carefully maintained vault records had not recorded, but what existed in the duplicate archive in the blunt language of a property charter I almost dismissed as routine, was that she had, in fact, named an heir. A daughter born before her public acknowledgement, kept out of the formal record by the woman's own choice, for reasons the charter did not explain but which I could now guess at. Protection. You do not publish a child's existence if you know that powerful men consider the bloodline a threat to their control of the Citadel's treaties. The daughter was named. Her line was traced in a separate addendum written in a different hand, a later hand, careful and small, through 3 further generations, each woman noted only by a given name and a location, no family names given. The last entry in the addendum, in ink that was perhaps 20 years old, gave a name. Sen, resident of the lower Graymere Passage, occupation listed simply as scribe. 20 years ago. I closed the charter and sat for a moment with the weight of it. 20 years ago, Doreth had overseen the previous vault inventory. The previous vault archivist had been removed from her post. I remembered that now, not clearly, a note in the records I had never paused over, a personnel change, unremarkable. A scribe named Sen, sent away from the Citadel. And now her daughter was in the lower vault, cataloging ancient seals, sent up by the lower academies, and she had touched the stonemark and the stone had blazed. She had not known. I was certain of that. You cannot fake the particular dislocation in a person's face when the ground shifts beneath them. Marin had not known who she was. She had come to Stonewarden to catalog seals because she was good at cataloging seals, and because the lower academies had sent her, and because it was her work. Doreth had known. He had to have known. The question that was filling my chest with something cold and careful and not quite rage, because rage would have made me careless, and I could not afford to be careless, was whether he had known who Marin was before he authorized the archiving assignment, and whether he had reasons for wanting her here that I did not yet understand. Or whether the assignment had come through channels he did not monitor, and her presence was a mistake he had not yet caught. Either way, she was in the vault, the seal was lit. And I now held a property charter that dismantled 30 years of the Citadel's official history. I went to find Doreth. He was in the council anteroom, which was where he generally could be found at this hour, overseeing the day's correspondence with the particular expression of self-important fatigue that he wore the way other men wore a good cloak. He looked up when I entered, read my face with the skill of a man who had been reading powerful men's faces for 30 years, and shifted into the careful neutral expression of someone who is deciding whether to be concerned. "My Lord King," he said, "I was not informed of a council session this afternoon." "There isn't one," I said. "I have a question." I set the property charter on the table in front of him. He looked at it. His expression did not change, which was, in itself, an answer. A man who looks at a document and feels nothing has either never seen it before or has been preparing for the moment someone shows it to him. The absence of recognition was too complete. He was not surprised. He was absorbing. "The Warden Queen succession addendum," I said. "I found it in the secondary archive. It traces the line through 4 generations. The last entry is 20 years old. It names a woman called Sen, who was, at that time, a scribe in the Citadel." I let a pause sit. The woman who was removed from the vault archivist's post 20 years ago was named Sen. Doreth said nothing. "The archiving team I authorized last month," I said. "How was the assignment processed?" He found his voice. It was steady. "Through the lower academy's placement office, my lord. a standard quarterly assignment. The Citadel requested additional cataloging support. The Academy supplied it. Did you review the names? I review all incoming personnel assignments, my lord. Marin, I said. He was still for exactly one breath too long. She is the daughter, I said. Sen's daughter. I have been downstairs. I have seen what the stone mark does when she touches it. I put my hands flat on the table and looked at him steadily. I want you to tell me how long you have known. The silence stretched. Outside the anteroom's high window, the mist that lay over the Highland citadel every morning at this hour was beginning to pull apart, the stone walls brightening toward noon. The lanterns in the anteroom looked faint and indoor against the day. Dorath looked, for the first time in 12 years of my watching him, like a man whose armor was not quite covering everything. "It is complicated, my Lord King," he said at last. "Then begin with the simplest part," I said. He told me. It took the better part of 2 hours, and it was not a simple story, and I will not pretend that any part of it made me feel better. What I will tell you is what mattered, the truth that Dorath had spent 30 years managing. The Warden Queen Compact, when it was sealed 400 years ago, had given the living Warden Queen bloodline the right to audit, and, if necessary, invalidate any treaty held in the Stonemark's vault that had been made in violation of the original Highland Accords. It was a provision built by women who understood that powerful men would eventually try to rewrite history, and who had the foresight to put a check on it that could not be forged. Only the living blood of their line could open the lead plate compact. Only they could read what it said. Only they could pronounce whether the Citadel's treaties honored the original agreements or betrayed them. 30 years ago, Dorath had discovered, in the course of a routine inventory, he said, though I did not entirely believe the word routine, that the compact contained language that would have nullified 3 of the border treaties on which his political standing depended. Treaties that had been written after the last Warden Queen died, drafted by men who knew the bloodline was gone, and who wrote the new agreements to suit themselves. If the compact was opened, if its language was invoked, those treaties would unravel, and the men who had made their careers on those treaties, Dorath among them, would lose the legal ground beneath their positions. So he had ensured the bloodline stayed buried. Not through violence. I want to be precise about that, because I spent part of those 2 hours tense for something worse, and the truth, while no less damning, was different in its method. He had not harmed Sen. He had simply ensured she was inconvenient to herself, her appointment cancelled, her position in the Citadel made untenable by small, compounding administrative discouragements, the kind of grinding difficulty that eventually persuades a person that a place does not want them and that they should leave. She had left. She had raised her daughter outside the Citadel, outside the Highland network, and the daughter had grown up not knowing her own bloodline because her mother had not told her, Dorath said, because she was afraid of what knowing would bring down. He had not known, he claimed when the archiving assignment came through, that Marin was Sen's daughter. He claimed the name had not flagged because Marin did not carry her mother's name. He claimed it was a coincidence, the Academy's quarterly placement, a name he had not thought to cross-reference. I let him finish. Then I told him I would need time to consider what came next, and I sent him to his chambers, and I set 2 of my most trusted guard captains outside his door. Not as a punishment, as a necessity. He was not a cruel man. He was a careful one like me, and careful men who have spent 30 years maintaining a particular order do not always respond well to that order's imminent collapse. I understood him better than I wanted to. Then I went back downstairs. Marin was still in the outer vault. She had not left for the midday meal. When I came through the doorway, she was sitting at the cataloging table with her hands folded in front of her, not working, looking at the colored thread markers with the expression of someone who has been sitting very still for a long time thinking about something too large for sitting still to help with. She stood when she heard me, looked at my face, read something there. "Whatever you found," she said quietly, "it is large." "It is," I said. I sat down across from her at the cataloging table, which is not a thing the Alpha King of Stonewarden generally does, sits across from an archivist at a work table, and folds his hands in the same space where her tools are, and I told her what I had found in the secondary archive, and what Dorath had told me. I told her about Sen, and the succession addendum, and the compact in the inner chamber, and the provision that had been the reason for 30 years of careful burial. I told her who she was. She listened without interrupting. That quality of stillness she had, the professional composure, held through most of it, and I watched it hold with a kind of admiration, because I knew from her face that every sentence was hitting something. She heard it all. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "My mother told me she had left the Citadel because of a disagreement over record-keeping procedures," she said at last. "She was protecting you," I said. "I know," a pause. "I understand that now." She looked at her hands, which were folded on the table, the hands that had made the seal blaze. "I am a cataloging archivist. I know how to classify a wax seal and build an inventory reference system and trace a provenance chain. That is what I am. I do not know how to be." She stopped. Then, with the directness I was beginning to understand was a permanent part of her, "What does it mean now? What happens now?" "That depends on you," I said. "The compact requires the living Warden Queen blood to open it and read it. It cannot be read by anyone else. What it says and whether its provisions are invoked is in your hands, not mine. I have no authority over it. The seal recognized you. The compact is yours." She looked at me steadily. "And what would you have me do with it?" I was careful with my answer because I meant it and I did not want it to sound like a command. "I am the Alpha King of Stonewarden. I have governed this citadel for 12 years on the strength of the treaties held in that vault. Some of those treaties, if the compact says what I believe it says, are not legitimate. They were written by men who knew the bloodline was gone and used its absence to their advantage." I held her gaze. "I would rather know what I have been ruling on than continue in ignorance, because it is convenient. But that is my preference. The compact belongs to your bloodline. I will not pretend to give you a free choice and then tell you what to do with it." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "The thread markers I have been using for the secondary vault holdings, the blue is for Warden Queen era documents. I have been finding them on shelves that were labeled as empty." She looked at the colored thread row on the table. "I noticed the discrepancy 3 days ago. I thought it was a cataloging error." "It was not a cataloging error," I said. "No." She stood and smoothed the gray robe with the automatic gesture of someone returning to work. "I would like to open the compact, my Lord King, if it is mine to open." "It is yours," I said. We went into the inner chamber together. The stonemark was still faintly lit, that slow silver pulse in the deepest veins of the stone, quiet and steady. The lead plate compact on the shelf above the pedestal had shifted in its casing when the seal blazed. I could see now that it had partially opened, the plates separated by a thin gap, as though the mechanism had been waiting only for confirmation before proceeding the rest of the way. Marin stood before the pedestal and looked at the compact for a moment. Then she lifted her hands to the lead plates and drew them apart. They opened smoothly. 400 years of sealed stone, and they moved in her hands like a book. The text inside was in an old Highland script, older than anything I had been taught to read as a boy, but Marin read it without hesitating. She was, I remembered, an archivist who had specialized in ancient document systems, which was, I thought, the kind of precise irony that the Warden Queens might have appreciated. She read slowly, her lips moving slightly, and I watched her face and watched the seal and felt my wolf's long-held breath begin to release, slowly, like an exhaled tension that had been building for longer than I had known. She read for perhaps 20 minutes. When she finished, she closed the plates. They sealed again with the same smooth precision, as though they had never been opened, and she turned to look at me. The compact lists the original Highland Accords, she said. 16 provisions. The border treaties that Dorath cited, 3 of them are in direct violation of provisions 7, 11, and 14. There is language here that is specific about the consequence. The treaties are null. She paused. There is also language about the Warden Queen bloodline's role in the compact. It is not just a reading right. It is a standing voice in the Highland Council, a permanent seat. The bloodline was designed to be a check on the Alpha King's council, not a separate power, a voice that could raise the original accords against any treaty that violated them. It was meant to exist alongside the Alpha King's governance, not instead of it. She said this carefully, and I understood why. She was telling me that the compact was not a threat to my rule, but to the men in my council who had been ruling in my name with less than honest hands. She was giving me the picture before the assembly, so I would know it. That was the moment I understood what Dorath had actually been afraid of, not the bloodline for its own sake. The check, the voice that could not be bought, could not be promoted into irrelevance, could not be sent away with administrative inconvenience, because it lived in the stone, and the stone recognized only the truth of blood. "Thank you," I said. She looked at me with the clear-eyed steadiness that I was learning was simply who she was. "What do you want to do?" "Convene the Highland Assembly," I said. "Bring them here." I will not pretend the next several hours were comfortable. I sent word to the Highland Assembly, the full council of elders, the pack representatives, the senior household, and requested their presence in the lower vault that evening, giving no reason beyond the Alpha King's request, which is generally sufficient. I assigned a secondary guard to Dorath's chambers, not because I expected him to do anything foolish, but because I had been careful for 12 years, and this was not the moment to stop. I ate nothing at midday and very little at the evening meal set up for me in the East Annex anteroom, and I sent a plate down to Marin in the vault, because I thought she had probably also not eaten, and was too focused on preparing whatever she was preparing to think of it. Oswin appeared at my side near the 6th hour of the afternoon, wearing his careful observer face, and told me that the archivist in the vault had said thank you for the plate, and that she had asked him to tell me she was ready. "How does she seem?" I asked. He considered it. "Like she is not afraid," he said. "Or she is, but she is more interested than afraid." I thought that was exactly right, and also exactly the right person to carry the Stonemark Compact before a full Highland Assembly. The assembly gathered in the lower vault at the 7th hour. There were 43 people in a room designed to hold perhaps 60, which made it close and warm with breath and lantern heat, and the close air carried the slight cold edge that radiated from the inner chamber, from the stonemark, which was visible through the open iron door, glowing with that slow silver light that everyone could now see. I let them look at it for a moment. The sound of 43 people noticing a thing that had not worked in 400 years is a specific sound, a collective held breath, very like my wolf's. Then I spoke. I told them what I had found in the secondary archive. I told them what Dorath had told me. I did not dramatize it. I gave them the facts in the order they mattered, the way I presented every charter at every council session, because I had been a careful king for 12 years and clarity is the most powerful tool a careful king possesses. I told them about Sen. I told them about the succession addendum. I told them that the Warden Queen bloodline was not extinct, that it had been managed into obscurity by 30 years of administrative concealment, and that its last living representative had been among them for the past 3 weeks cataloging their ancient seals. I nodded to Marin. She came through the inner chamber door and stood at the front of the room in her gray archivist's robe, and she did not look small, which is the thing I want to mark. She was not tall, not imposing in the way the assembly was used to reading imposing, but she stood with a stillness and a directness that occupied the room exactly as much as it needed to. She did not perform anything. She was simply present. She put her hand on the stonemark. The seal blazed. It was stronger this time, brighter and colder, the silver light filling the inner chamber and spilling through the door into the outer vault. And with it came a sound I had not heard before, a low resonance in the stone walls as if the chamber were finding a note it had forgotten. On the shelf above the pedestal, the lead plate compact opened on its own, all the way, spreading flat as if for reading. The temperature dropped sharply enough that I heard several people behind me inhale. The assembly watched in silence. Marin withdrew her hand. The light stayed, not fading this time, sustained and steady. She turned to face the room. "I am Marin," she said. "My mother was Sen, daughter of Lyra, daughter of Vesni, daughter of the last acknowledged Warden Queen. The compact is open. I have read it." She paused, and in the pause the only sound was the stone's low resonance. 3 of the treaties in this vault violate provisions of the original Highland Accords. The compact is specific about the consequence. I am not here to dismantle the governance of this citadel. The compact was never designed for that. It was designed to call back what has drifted too far. That is what I am calling. She set the lead plates, still open, on the edge of the cataloging table where everyone could see them. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when a very large thing has just moved, and no one yet knows where it will settle. I stepped forward to stand beside her. I want to be clear about why. It was not a calculated governance decision, though it had governance implications. It was not purely the bond, though my wolf had not been quiet since the morning I first came downstairs, and had not been merely holding its breath since the moment I sat across from her at that table and watched her absorb something enormous, and then say, precisely and simply, "What happens now?" It was both of those things, and it was also something that had nothing to do with calculation. She was standing alone before 43 people in an institution that had spent 30 years making certain she would never exist, and I was the alpha king of that institution, and I was not going to let her stand alone. I addressed the assembly. "The Warden Queen Compact is a valid legal instrument under Highland law," I said. "The bloodline it recognizes is present and living. The seat it establishes in the Highland Council is restored, as of tonight, to its rightful holder." I looked at the elders. "The 3 treaties under question will be reviewed in light of the compact's provisions. This review is not optional, and it will not be delayed." I paused. "Doreth will stand before the assembly next week to give an accounting of his decisions regarding the vault records and the previous archivist. That accounting will be conducted fully and publicly." I turned to Marin. She was looking at me steadily, the way she had been looking at me all afternoon, that clear-eyed directness that did not perform anything. "There is one more matter before the assembly," I said, to her specifically and to the room in general, because it needed to be said in front of everyone who had been part of this silence, and I would not say it in a private corridor. "The stonemark seal does not only authenticate the compact. The histories are clear about its secondary function, which Doreth's version of the histories omitted." I held her gaze. "It recognizes the Warden Queen blood. It also, when the bond is present, recognizes the mate of that bloodline. The light has not gone out since you touched it this morning, Marin. That has not happened before in the recorded history of the seal. The histories say it means something." She was very still. "I am aware," I said quietly enough that it was between us, though the room could hear it, "that I am the alpha king of an institution that spent 30 years hiding who you are. I am aware that the ground between us is complicated. I am not asking you to set that complication aside. I am telling you that the bond exists, and that it is yours to accept or refuse, and that whatever you decide I will honor it." I kept my voice steady. "I am also telling you, in front of every person in this room, that I will not pretend it is not there. I am done pretending things are not there because it is convenient." She looked at me for a long time. My wolf was not holding its breath anymore. It was waiting, with the particular patience of something that has waited a very long time already and knows, in the way deep things know, that the waiting is nearly done. The compact's language about the mate bond, she said at last, is in Provision 3. She looked at the open lead plates on the table. I read it. A pause. It is very specific. What does it say? She looked back at me. That the bond is not the Warden Queen's obligation, she said. It is her right, hers to take or leave. She tilted her head slightly. The women who wrote that compact were thorough. They were, I agreed. She was quiet for another moment, and in the silence the stonemark held its silver light, and the assembly held its collective breath, and Oswin, I would later learn, was watching from the back of the room with the grave and satisfied expression of a child who had asked a question and received a very complete answer. I would like, Merrin said, to take it. The assembly that followed that night was the longest and, I believe, the most consequential of my 12-year reign, and most of it had nothing to do with the mate bond. We worked through the compact provisions. We established a provisional review committee for the 3 nullified treaties. We set the timeline for Dorath's public accounting. We voted to restore the Warden Queen seat to the Highland Council's formal structure, and to name Merrin as its current holder. Merrin participated in all of this with the methodical precision of a woman who had spent her professional life building reference systems. She had opinions about process, firm ones, and she was not hesitant about expressing them to 43 elders in a room that had spent 30 years pretending her bloodline did not exist. I found this, if I am honest, to be the most satisfying part of the evening. The elders found it less satisfying, which seemed to me appropriate. A comfortable institution needs an uncomfortable voice. That is exactly what the compact was designed to provide. Dorath did not attend. He was in his chambers, under guard, and I had sent word through one of my captains that he would be given the opportunity to prepare his accounting before the assembly scheduled for the following week. I was giving him that because I had governed 12 years alongside him, and because I had once trusted him, and because the careful king I had been for those 12 years understood that ruining a man quickly and ruining him justly are not always the same thing. He would be given the chance to account for himself fully before the full assembly. What the assembly decided after that was not my decision alone to make. This, too, I believe, was what the Warden Queen Compact was for, not to give one person the power to dismantle everything in a single night. To slow the machinery down enough that truth could be heard before consequences landed. After the assembly ended and the elders filed out, some of them looking at Merrin with the particular expression of people who have reconsidered, which is a different and more hopeful expression than the look of people who are simply regrouping, and after Oswin was found in the back of the room and sent, with a respectful sternness, to bed, and after the guard changes were made and the vault was secured and the stonemark sealed back in its chamber, still glowing. It did not dim when Merrin left the room, which the histories I had now checked confirmed was what happened when the bond was present and acknowledged. Merrin and I stood for a while in the outer vault at the cataloging table. The colored thread markers were still in their row. The pen she had set down when I entered this morning was still lying beside the classification book, exactly where she had put it. She looked at it. I have 11 more shelves to catalog in the outer vault, she said, and then the secondary holdings in the annex. Take as long as you need, I said. She looked at me sideways, that slight tilt of the head I was learning to read. I was the archiving team lead. The others will be reassigned to the lower academy after the quarterly term. It will be inconvenient for the cataloging record if I leave with them. I will see to it that the assignment is extended, I said, indefinitely if you want it. She was quiet for a moment. Is that the Alpha King talking or? Both, I said. I'm not good at separating those things. I have been the Alpha King for 12 years and it is thoroughly mixed in with who I am. What I can tell you is that the reasoning is genuine either way. The vaults need cataloging. The Highland Council needs its Warden Queen voice. And I paused and then chose to be direct, because she had been direct with me all day, and it would have been dishonest to suddenly become careful about this particular thing. I would like you to be here. Not only because of what the compact requires, because of what I have learned about who you are today and what I would like to continue learning. She looked at the colored thread markers for a moment. I did not come to Stonewarden looking for any of this, she said. I want you to know that. I came to catalog seals. I know. I am not, she stopped, started again. I have spent my whole life not knowing that I was the last of anything. My mother gave me a profession and a very good classification system and did not tell me about Provision 3. She almost smiled. I think she was trying to protect me. I think she was also, possibly, very tired of powerful men deciding what the Warden Queen bloodline was allowed to know about itself. She was right to be tired of it, I said. I intend, for what it is worth, to be a different kind of powerful man. You have been today, she said, simply and without flattery. It was an assessment. I understood that she would not have said it if she did not mean it, and I valued it more than I knew how to say, so I did not try. She picked up the pen from the table, set it in its case, closed the classification book, squared the colored thread markers. I will stay, she said, for the catalog and for the other things. I am glad, I said. We walked out of the vault together, through the narrow stone hall that smells of old paper and cold air, up the back stair, past the east kitchens where the last of the evening's heat still lingered, and back into the lit corridors of Stonewarden, where my household was going about the late evening's work, and the guards were at their posts, and the citadel was, as it had always appeared from the outside, in order. From the inside, of course, it was considerably less orderly than it had been that morning. I found I did not mind. The review that followed Doreth's public accounting took 4 months. I will not pretend it was pleasant. Doreth gave his account before the full Highland Assembly with the resigned precision of a man who had understood, somewhere in the night between his guard assignment and the morning, that the only remaining choice he had was between honesty and the kind of stonewalling that makes everything worse. He chose honesty. I credited him for it, while the Assembly credited him for very little else. The 3 nullified treaties were renegotiated over the course of the winter, with Merrin present at every session in her capacity as the Highland Council's Warden Queen voice, a capacity she exercised with the same methodical directness she brought to everything else, and which the negotiating parties found alternately clarifying and deeply uncomfortable, which was, again, exactly the right outcome. The border compact that Doreth had specifically been protecting turned out, when its provisions were read in full light, to be considerably less important than he had believed. The treaty it invalidated had been used to justify a particular land arrangement in the eastern passes. The land arrangement, renegotiated honestly, produced terms that were actually more stable than the original ones, because they had been agreed to by parties who were not operating under legal duress. Doreth had spent 30 years protecting a fiction that, examined clearly, had not needed protecting. The men who had benefited from it were embarrassed rather than ruined. Several of them came to me privately in the weeks that followed and said various versions of the same thing, which was that they had not known the extent of what Doreth had done, and would not have sanctioned it if they had. I listened to each of them and said the same thing in return, that I believed them, and that what I expected from them now was the same thing I expected from myself, which was that we would all govern more carefully going forward. I meant it. The 12-year version of me who had let the vaults alone and trusted Doreth's tedium as armor, I was done being that king. Not because I had been wrong about everything, but because careful governance that avoids the inconvenient corner is not really careful governance. It is comfortable governance. And comfort, as the Warden Queens had understood when they built a check into the stone, is the thing that allows injustice to become invisible. Oswin, when the winter term ended, asked Merrin if she would teach him the colored thread classification system properly, since he had learned bits of it in fragments and wanted to understand the whole. She told him she would, on the condition that he paid attention and did not skip the chapters on provenance tracing just because they were tedious. He agreed to these terms with the gravity he gave everything. I listened to this negotiation from the doorway without interrupting, and thought that my father, who had been a careful king and a good one, and who had also not known what Dorath was doing, would have liked Maren very much. On the morning of the spring equinox, 4 months after the night of the assembly, I brought the Highland Council together in the Great Hall for the formal session at which the renegotiated treaties were to be signed, and the constitutional status of the Warden Queen seat officially recorded in the Citadel's main archive for the first time in 4 centuries. Maren sat at the council table. She wore a robe the color of the Highland mist, not the gray archivist's robe, something made properly for her over the winter, with the Warden Queen's sigil embroidered at the cuff in silver thread. She had her pen and her classification book. She looked, as she generally looked, like someone who had prepared thoroughly and was ready to work. I called the session to order. We signed the treaties. We recorded the constitutional restoration. We witnessed the stonemark's light, brought up from the vault in its pedestal for the occasion, because it seemed right that the seal that had carried 400 years of waiting should be present, pulse strong and steady in the great hall's morning light, and the pack elders who had never seen it lit in their lifetimes stood and looked at it with an expression I understood from the inside, the expression of people whose sense of what is possible has just been quietly revised. After the session, in the brief stillness between the formal business and the business of the day, Maren leaned slightly toward me and said, in the practical tone she used for assessment, "The secondary archive still needs cross-referencing with the vault holdings. There are 11 years of discrepancies." "I know," I said. "It will take some time." "I know," I said again. "I am not in a hurry." She considered this. That is a significant change from the man who spent 12 years not going downstairs. "It is," I said. "I found the lower vaults worth my attention in the end." She did not quite smile. She came close. It was enough. "The stonemark has not gone dark since that first morning. The histories record that it stays lit so long as the Warden Queen bloodline is present and living. They also say, in the old Highland script that Maren translated for me over 3 evenings at the cataloging table, that it brightens when the bond is close. I have found that to be accurate. I pay attention to it now in the way. I pay attention to all things that tell the truth about what is actually happening in the room. The pack that stayed silent for 30 years has not been ceremonially humbled. That is not the kind of king I am, and it is not the kind of Warden Queen Maren is. What has happened instead is more gradual and more durable. The Citadel's governance has, in the months since the assembly, quietly reorganized itself around the fact of an honest record. Small things. The secondary archive is now cross-referenced with the vault holdings, which has turned up 2 additional discrepancies that Maren is working through with the precision she brings to everything. The quarterly steward's reports have expanded to include the vault's full inventory. The lower vaults are no longer Dorath's alone to define. Oswin has memorized the first 4 chapters of the colored thread system and is working on the 5th. He told me last week, with the gravity of a child delivering a careful verdict, that Maren explains things so that they make sense, and that he thinks that is harder than explaining things so that they sound impressive. I told him I agreed. He said he thought I should tell her that. I told him I had, in fact, already told her that in different words. He nodded. He seemed satisfied. The northern Highland winters are long, and the mist over the citadel lifts late in the mornings, and the stonemark's light in its deep vault chamber is the color of new snow, cold and clear and steady, the kind of light that does not borrow from anything. I am learning, in my 13th year of governance, what it means to stop delegating the things that matter, the cataloging of what is actually there, rather than what is convenient to record, the maintenance of an honest archive, the particular quality of attention required to govern alongside a voice that can call back what has drifted too far. It is harder than governing alone. It is also, I am discovering, more true. Marin, when I told her this, sitting at the cataloging table in the outer vault after a long session, the lanterns burning low, the stonemark glowing through the iron door with its slow and steady light, set her pen aside and looked at me with the clear-eyed directness that I have stopped trying to anticipate, because it is always a little more honest than I expect. The compact was written by women who had been governing alongside men who thought governance meant making decisions alone, she said. They built the check because they knew it would always be possible to say the bloodline was gone, to tell a careful king that there was nothing in the vaults worth his attention and have him believe it. She paused. They also built the mate bond provision, which was not strictly necessary for the compact's legal function. No, I agreed, it was not strictly necessary. I have been thinking about why they included it. What have you concluded? She looked at the stonemark's light. I think they wanted to make the check personal, she said, not just institutional. They knew that a voice in the council could be managed over time, ignored, or worked around, or given a role so large and formal that it becomes ceremonial. They wanted the Warden Queen to have a reason to stay that was not only constitutional duty. She looked back at me. They were thorough. They were, I said. She picked her pen back up, turned to the classification book. Then, without looking at me, she said, "The 11 years of discrepancies will take approximately 8 months to resolve if I work at the current pace." "Then we have 8 months," I said. "And after that, the secondary holdings in the West Annex." "And after that." She almost smiled again. The stonemark held its light. The Warden Queens, 400 years ago, had sealed a truth in stone and trusted that the right bloodline would find its way back to it, however long it took. They had been correct about the stone, and the blood, and the time it would take, and they had been wise enough to put the choice in the hands of the woman the stone recognized rather than the hands of the king who stood beside her. I think now that this was also what they meant by the mate bond provision, not a destiny that removed the choice, a destiny that made the choice visible and then left it where it belonged. She chose. The seal stayed lit. That, I believe, is the truest record of what happened in the lower vaults of Stonewarden in the late autumn of my 13th year, and it will be catalogued correctly now in the archive that bears an honest account of what is actually there. Whatever Marin decides to classify it under, I trust the thread markers,